Hello, this is Imani Latif of Peep Comics, and you're watching Black Comics Universe exclusively here on The Experience. I'd like to thank my friend Dan for that teaser breakdown of Spider-Man No Way Home. I'm anxiously awaiting that movie. Please help us out by hitting share on this link and giving us a like and follow on The Experience. Then make sure to tune in for our original programming 7 days a week. The Black Comics Universe streams every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern on all DSPs, including Facebook and YouTube. And also, you can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Black Comics Universe. Tonight, I have my friend, indie publisher and author, Bill Campbell of Rosarium Publishing, here with me tonight. And he'll be coming up. Yep, there he is. What's up, Bill?
Hey, how's it going?
He is definitely on my short list of all the handful of people I met when I very first started getting into comics. It's going on 10 years. It's getting close to 10. It's close.
What? How long have we been publishing, or how long we've known each other?
How long I've known you? I think it's been at least 6-7 years.
We're 8 years old.
Yeah,
it's 8 years old. Mothership came out. Mothership came out in October of 2013.
Yep. Yeah. And so, again, Bill is a publisher at Rosarium Publishing. I had to get out of the habit of assuming everybody knows who my friends are. I'll just give you 30 seconds to give everybody the spiel as to who you are and what you do.
As you said, I'm the head cook and bottle washer of Rosarium Publishing. We started with Mothership, Tales from Afrofuturism and Beyond back in October of 2013. As I like to say, we've been introducing the world to itself since 2013. We focus on comics and science fiction, all with a multicultural flair. As we like to say, whoever you are, you're in Rosarium. We've done stuff like Bluehead Mojo with John Jennings, who I did an interview with just yesterday. With the fast forward, it was like my first time on this format. Now I feel like a pro. And then stuff like Ink with Sabrina Varvulius. We did APB, Artists Against Police Brutality, and just a whole bunch of stuff. Yeah. I guess it's about it.
Tonight,
and I write. I also write.
Yeah. And tonight we were talking about the day the Klan came to town.
Yes.
The book that I've been shamed about that I have not read yet, but that's okay because we are friends here. Everybody's friends here.
Yeah. I'm not going to shame you. I mean, I'm not going to shame you. As I said, I could have sent it to you.
I feel ashamed. Which is fine, and I will get to that when I read it. I'll have a long review to make up for it.
That's cool. That's cool.
And I know it seems like this story came up when it came up online. You had mentioned it briefly. We were talking about it had to have been around. I think it was pre-Trump. I believe.
No, this
because not your story. I'm talking about the last time you mentioned it. I think we were talking about it on social media. I think when people were like punching Nazis and stuff like that, and when that was a thing on Twitter, and you had brought up the fact that you actually literally had to go out and punch some fascists in the face in real life.
That's not anything I really talk about, but I used to live in Eastern Europe. Yeah.
That was the thing. That was right.
Yes. Excuse me.
No problem.
That's not anything I really talk about in public. But the day the Klan came to town is set in 1923 in my hometown of Carnegie, Pennsylvania. So
okay.
And this the thing that fascinated me about it was that I grew up there and nobody ever talked about it. So basically,
Mm,
what happened in 1923, for people who might know a bit of American history, the Klan was at the height of its power. This is after
mm,
Birth of a Nation with D.W. Griffith. So the Klan was millions of members strong, and it wasn't just in the South; it was all across America. So
mm,
only were the military as a civic organization and a political organization, and they were actually running candidates all across the country. So
mm,
the thing that was enticing about my hometown of Carnegie was that it's full of European names you can neither spell nor pronounce. So it was a small mining town. It was a small mining town, literally. Like the town is built on top of a coal mine, and also it
mm,
had a steel mill.
mm,
So it was full of people all across Europe, and it was heavily Catholic.
okay.
So this place had tons of immigrants. Was a largely immigrant town, and it had a few Orthodox churches, but the one attraction was it had two Catholic churches on the same street.
Mm,
So the Klan decided to have something they called Carnegie Day,
mm,
and about 30,000 clans members decided to hold a rally, picnic, fireworks, etc. in Carnegie on a town of like 3,000 people. And then
okay.
they decided about half the town was their target. So it was about 30,000 people against about 1,500 people. And then they
Mm,
decided to march down the street with the two Catholic churches and just try to beat the hell out of everybody. And the
mm,
Klan lost. Um, so I was just like, my God, that's right in my wheelhouse. I mean, it's a great story. And I just became obsessed with the idea of it. And it's really funny because, as I said, I didn't know anything about it. It was just we were at my mom's during Easter back in 2019, and my brother and I were just talking about hidden histories of Pittsburgh, and he knew about the Klan rally, and he's like, "Oh, like the Klan rally," and I was like, "What are you talking about?" And then
mm,
after that, I just kind of had to like look into it. And then I just happened to be randomly, I was coming home back to DC. I was coming back home from TCAF, Toronto Comic Arts Festival. So I
mm,
had to go, and I was going to stay at my mom's in Pittsburgh, it's like a halfway point, and I had to drive around Carnegie. And while I was driving around the town, the main character popped up
mm.
in my head.
Oh, okay. So this is like a
So that's how that came about.
now does it like knowing that you have like a personal story like similar to this, has this telling this story been therapeutic for you at all?
No, I mean, okay, so well, there were a few personal connections, not
Hmm.
that necessarily. It's not a thing I really
Hmm.
want to talk about.
Yeah, I understand. No, 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 I get it. It's
um, yeah.
it's interesting. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, no. Well, there are a few things. I'm half immigrant, right? My dad was an immigrant. My mom's American,
Okay.
so
Okay.
so it kind of touches, anti-immigrant talk, and just the fact that they were, targeting immigrants, even though they weren't targeting, Jamaicans, because we weren't really allowed in the country at the time. Um,
Mm,
so they weren't targeting us, but just, the whole anti-immigrant strain in American history is always, something I kind of take personally anyway. And
mm,
then the fact that this was in my hometown, and then all of this goes down like in front of my church.
mm, mm,
So from like a very kind of personal story because like this history I know didn't happen. Like it happened in a place that I was regularly. So like when I was reading about it, like I could see it, like the
Mm-hmm.
whole thing. Um, so I don't really think of this as like therapeutic. It was more along the lines of just a story I kind of, even though it wasn't mine, because the main character in the story is Sicilian. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I just felt sort of like an affinity towards the story itself because there's so many parallels to how America just constantly acts towards immigrants.
You know, it's interesting how interactions or interacting with the Klan as an institution, right? It's such an it's an interesting touch point in a lot of stories. Like there's this story, it's Superman versus the Klan. Um, my own hometown, we've had two Klan rallies, right? One turned into a riot, right? It was like it was almost it's a similar story. They weren't fighting the town; they were fighting Bloods and Crips. Bloods and Crips came together in my hometown, and they fought the Klan. Well, I take that back. They showed up at the rally,
Mm-hmm.
and they ended up having to fight the police. That's what happened. Because when the Klan comes to my town, and they've been
Right.
here at least twice, they come to my town, they usually are protected by the police.
Right.
And
Yeah.
what ended up happening is that, it was a gang truce that day. And they showed up. And it's very interesting, like we all, at least here us in middle America, have these touch points where we have, at least seen it. You know what I mean? Where that whole idea of flyover country is not
Right.
just something we see on TV. Like I can walk out of my studio right now, and I'll see somebody with a thin blue line, flag, or still, it actually makes me nervous when I see huge American flags because I know somewhere in there that symbolism is tied to, you know,
Oh
that
yeah,
type of
definitely.
all that, anti-immigrant or anti
Well, I
any
mean,
number of different things.
and well, there are a lot of similarities. Well, I mean, because one of the things that a lot of people don't realize was, when we go back to these 1923 definitions, these people from like Eastern Europe and Southern Europe and stuff, they weren't white, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you look at like the Klan's rhetoric, it's still the same. It's just that now that these people have been incorporated into whiteness. So
Mm-hmm.
you had the same rhetoric. The Klan had the same rhetoric that they've always had. It's just
Mm-hmm.
that Italians, Poles, Czechs, whatever, they weren't white. So the Klan was viewing them the same way that they were viewing us. So, and that's why they came there. So that they were protecting whiteness and they were protecting what they called Americanism. So,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the people like they got 30,000 people to come to Carnegie, but they weren't all from Pennsylvania. They
Right.
came from Kentucky, they came from Ohio, they came from West Virginia, they came from Virginia and Maryland. Like it was a regional event. So, and we know that the Klan was highly active in Indiana and Ohio and stuff at the time. So that wasn't a surprise. And then the other thing is like, these different um, groups, they weren't necessarily allies.
Mm.
I mean, even 50 some odd years later, when I get to the town, they didn't necessarily. They still, it was sort of like the last vestiges before they became white. So like these different groups still talked horrible things about each other, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
growing up, I knew like all the different ethnic slurs for all these different European groups, right? Because they still
Right.
called each other that stuff. So like the thing that I thought was very fascinating were interesting for me to write was that, some in other hands, like this might have been like a very kumbaya kind of moment. Like, oh, we all
Mm.
got together and we fought the Klan, but it was all. I mean, it was all very situational. It's all like, yeah, we don't really like each other, but we have a bigger enemy right now. And
And
I think
that's
that there's certain lessons in that with your Crips and Bloods too. Like I think there's certain
right.
lessons that in that are definitely applicable today. You know, especially after the last 4 years in January 6th, that you might not all like each other, but there are like bigger
Hmm.
things in front of us. You know what I mean?
I definitely felt that with this last election that is sort of like people had to a lot of voters I think made some compromises for the greater good. Like they ideally there was we all know that there was a far more progressive candidates that could have been president, but this was one of those elections that felt like everybody sort of played to win and sort of did they picked an obvious side, um, especially when you have like 14 million some people voted in the last election. So it was almost like you could tell it was definitely a thing where people um, had to set some things aside to to make it work. Um,
Well, I mean, I don't like my personal
yeah,
politics are my
yeah.
personal politics are
Go ahead, Bill. I can see it. It's like you're burning over there. To
no. I mean, okay. So here's the problem, right? So my
yeah,
personal politics are far left of the system itself.
yeah. Okay,
So I kind of view voting in a different light
okay.
than maybe a true believer would.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I kind of view voting as like anything else in life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, you want to go to Aruba, I want to go to Aruba, but there are times you got to keep the lights on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I
Yep.
mean, yeah, I would like to have the candidate of my dreams sometime, but
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you just gotta go like, well, what's going to keep the thing together?
Right.
What's going to buy you
That,
time?
yeah, I think the
You know?
mistake that a lot of us make is like we look at politics as a utopia, as looking and instead of looking at it as a, a utility. You know, we
Yeah.
look at it as like this thing is going to change. Everything.
Right.
Just like we're gonna wake up and everything. So it's like no, yes, just like you said, we know we're keeping the lights on. We're paying the bill. We're you know uh paying the dues, keeping the lights on, keeping the doors open, that type of thing. Staying in the game as opposed to like we're just going to just totally up in everything all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I personally don't necessarily like it, but at the same time, just being the history nerd that I am, I mean, I think a lot of it, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the we're a victim of like our own educational system on a lot of fronts, but I think a lot of
Mm-hmm.
it just has to do with the way we're taught social change. Like we're like, oh,
Mm.
FDR did all this stuff, and you're like, well, there was like 70 years of political movements that made an FDR possible.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you look at, like eyes on the prize say, there was like decades upon decades of, political action that made like, the March on Washington even possible.
Right.
So it's sort of like, you have these changes that happen, but they're a lot slower than you really think and really kind of realize that they are.
You
Because
know.
we're only taught in snapshots.
Right.
Like we're not. Yeah, because I was watching this thing about Red Summer, and like when the vets came back and you know caught wreck, and there was like bloody uprisings all across the country.
Mm-hmm.
And one historian said, a lot of the veterans vowed that day like something like that was never going to happen again. And
Mm-hmm.
those are like the people who flooded the ranks and formed their NAACP chapters and started all these different organizations, and went north and started all this stuff. It was just like that
Mm-hmm.
gave us where we are right now.
Right.
Yeah, and
No, no, that's
you know,
wonderful. I like the way you tie that all together. Speaking of
yeah.
which, so we know that traditional or in the real world that change is slow or very systematic, political and all this kind of stuff. Is this why that you are so drawn to, say, speculative fiction and Afrofuturism, where you can tell stories where um, change is more instantaneous or more uh, transformative?
Well, I think that well, there are two things, right? Like, sister in college, because I decided I wanted to be a writer when I was like 9. It was kind of crazy. But sister in college was just like, you're kind of a nutcase. You should read science fiction. And
Mm,
this is like the late '80s, early '90s, because I'm old. And so she was like, here's Samuel R. Delaney and Octavia Butler, right? So, reading Chip, I was just like, oh my God, this man is smarter than I'll ever be. I want to do what he does, right?
right.
And then when I read Wild Seed, I was just like, this encapsulates like everything. Science fiction encapsulates all my different interests,
Right.
right? Because I'm a dilettante history nerd. I love psychology, sociology, all this stuff. Um, I'm science, just all of these different religion, all politics, all this stuff. And
Hmm.
in mundane fiction, it's kind of hard to tackle those things in fiction without being too like polemical or preachy or whatever. But in
Right.
science fiction, you can kind of imagine all these different things and talk about like all these different historical events and imagine better futures without like, yeah, being preachy about it, right?
Hmm.
So, and then it's just sort of like imagining like all these different possibilities. And just like different warnings, or just kind of taking, while still like examining the box that we live in, is just kind of thinking of this box in a different context, right? So like you take something like Coontown, I mean that was pretty much it, right? It was like when my agent told me I wasn't ghetto enough, like, I was like, my dad's from Kingston and my mom's from Marietta, PA. Of course, I'm
Right.
gonna be from Carnegie, right? Like, that's
Right. Right. Right.
where else are they gonna move? Right?
Mm-hmm.
um, but but like at the time, like in the early 2000s, there were like a bunch of things that weren't making sense to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like crime was going down, but like arrest rates were still up, and brothers were going and sisters were going away for longer and longer jail sentences for lesser and lesser crimes, and just like the media and just like all this like black criminality, and I'm like, but the stats don't jibe, like, you know what I mean? It was just like things
Mm-hmm.
weren't jiving, because I read stats,
Right.
like all these different portrayals weren't making sense. I'm like, wait, why am I seeing more like us shooting people like on TV and all this stuff, but like in the streets I'm not seeing it, and I'm looking at like murder rates like plummeting at the time, and just like all this stuff, and like none of it makes sense. And then he says you're not ghetto enough, and I'm like, bing. like it all just kind of made sense. So then I was just like, oh, right, like these are all like part of the same thing, right?
Right.
Like seeing all this stuff on TV, even in fiction, affects like seeing people going to jail for 30 years for like a little rock, right? Like it's
Right.
all part of the same thing. Now, this was before the new Jim Crow, which
Mm-hmm.
does it academically, says like takes you out
Right.
of that context.
Mm-hmm.
But fictionally speaking, I was just like, that's how Coontown was born,
Now, when
right?
you say Coontown, this is your first book,
This is my
right?
second. That was my third novel,
Second book,
Coontown,
third
Coontown
novel,
Killing Caper.
right?
Yeah,
And it was
that
like,
was the Vampire Crack Babies.
right. It was. It was basically. I remember when we talked about it. It's basically. It was your response to that criticism not being ghetto enough. Like it's a parody of
Right,
on the whole
right.
ghetto
Because I
lit
was
phenomenon
at
of
the
the
time I'm
'90s,
like,
right?
look, you're not telling white writers like, but you weren't telling white writers they weren't Appalachian enough, or like, I'm just like not getting like that authentic San Diego feel. Like you wouldn't say that
Right.
shit to like, oh, I'm sorry, can I swear?
Um,
um,
lightly
sorry,
PG-13, but
sorry.
we're good.
Sorry. Oh,
We're
so
good.
I can
We're
say
good.
that in one F word. All right. All right.
Yeah, one. Yeah.
But yeah, you wouldn't say that to a white writer. I'm like, so why are you like so determined for me to be ghetto? Because that was like an accident of birth, right? Like that I
Mhm.
wasn't born. Like, yeah, I was born. I was born and raised in the suburbs. That was like an accident. There wasn't anything.
You know,
So why are you like so determined for me to and other black writers at the time to do
right,
that when all I want to do is like write science fiction and stuff?
right.
So, but science fiction and satire gave me like a way to examine that, right? So,
Hmm.
there's a professor who actually teaches Coontown is critical race theory,
Okay.
because it does examine that, like
Hmm.
mediated political realities and just like and like all the things that go into um, like how the state operates.
What is that like? Having your stories taught? Like, it's one thing. I think a lot of I like to use this show as a way for new authors and new writers or comic book creators to you know um learn about comics and how the industry works and all this kind of stuff. Not too many indie people um can say that their book is taught academically.
Mm-hmm.
What is that like? What's that phenomenon like?
Um, it's humbling.
Because it doesn't just to expound on it. It doesn't feel as if it's sort of like from a typical author, a typical book. It's not so much that the story ends with the publishing of the book, but to a degree it does. Like from that point on, you're trying to sell it, and you might run into a fan or get to discuss the book with fans, possibly. But the idea that your book is in the hand of students, and then they're reading and they're formulating their own thoughts and opinions on this book, and then like let alone the questions that they may have of you as an author, that's a whole nother conversation that not too many authors get to experience.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've had the opportunity and the privilege for several things. Um, you know, things I've written and published and edited. So I've had to speak in front of university classes on a few, just not just Coontown, but a few other things
Mhm.
too. Um,
Yeah.
so as I said, it is humbling. It's very. I think the thing that's kind of interesting is that especially because like when I was in college, right, I was reading a bunch of old dead white guys, right?
Hmm.
So you can't
A lot of
you're
dead black guys too.
yeah, they were dead, yeah.
I mean, just to be honest, it's like
They were
I
dead.
mean,
Yeah, you're
it's
right.
that
Yeah,
to a degree. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah. They were dead. Yeah.
Africana studies, at least for me, it wasn't all that modern either. But I'm just
No, no, you're totally right.
dropping
You're
a thought
totally
in there.
right. Like when you said that, you're like totally right because it was
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
yeah, because by that time, yeah, I mean, Toni Morrison was probably pretty much the only living, and a couple others were pretty much the only
Hmm.
living authors that I really read in class at the
Yeah.
time.
Hmm.
So, so in a lot of ways, it's just kind of weird because you're
Hmm.
like, wait, I'm alive. you know,
Yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah.
so like the browning of academia is like one, it's like really cool and encouraging, right? So you're just sitting there going like, because like 30 years ago, because I'm old, when I was in college, I was just like, there was like this dream. I'm like, I just want academia one day to be like, full of like brown folks with like real world experiences who aren't trying to be ivory,
Hmm.
the ivory part of the ivory tower, and like now they're there, right? And so
Right.
like it's really cool because like you can relate to like these professors and they're like like you can like talk to them. But and
Right. Right.
then so that part is really cool. And then like the other weird part is like me, like I write stuff that you think is worth studying, and you're like, okay,
Hmm.
cool. But then the really fascinating part is just the interaction that you have with students, right?
Right.
And that like how seriously they take your text and just like you learn stuff from them
Right.
like about your own thing or like you're surprised because like a lot of casual readers don't because like I play games when I'm writing because I write in
Mm.
different layers, so there are
Okay.
things that I do that are only for me, um
Mhm.
just to see if I could do them, and
Okay.
then like when they like pick up on that stuff and you're like, wow, that is like really kind of wild.
Now,
um
now has that in any sort of way affected the way you approach storytelling, knowing that this is not just for the casual reader, like this is possibly going to be in the hand of students?
Um, well, I never really have written for the general public.
Hmm.
Like I was reading this one time. I was just, some old obscure Italian author that I never heard of that I picked up at some used bookstore one time, and there was a foreword to it, and in the foreword they said that there was a certain truth to this author that you can tell because he never wrote for the general public.
Hmm.
Like, so
Okay.
he was just like a lot more honest than most writers that you'll read because he wasn't trying to impress nobody,
Okay.
right? Um, and I just really thought I took that was just something I took to heart. I was just like, I don't. I'm not trying to be rich or famous or anything. I'm just trying to write something, like Toni Morrison said, like something that you don't see, something that you would want to read. So, like
Hmm.
for me, it's just sort of like, I set like these little personal challenges for myself just to see if I can pull them off.
And
Um,
now, is that how you approach publishing as well? Because you don't just publish your own work; you publish other people's work as well.
well, I mean, Rosarium was never meant to be a self-publishing venture.
Okay.
So, in fact, you know, um, I self-published my first three novels, and then I started Rosarium. So then I was like, well, I just have these three books. I might as well make them Rosarium books since I own the company. But
Hmm.
the only thing that the only creative thing that I've done was Bad Mothers, and
Hmm.
then later on next year we're coming out with a Voodoo Western that graphic novel. So that I'm doing with Lou Netter. Um, So
Lou
those are
Netter.
only Lou Netter. Yeah, he's a professor out in England. He's originally from the Bronx, I think.
Mm. That name sounds
um,
familiar. I'm trying to. I think I've seen that name before.
but yeah, it's just this crazy voodoo western that people don't understand. so, so I'm just publishing it myself because I like the story. But so Rosarium was never meant for so you figure like in 8 years I've only self-published like a thing.
True.
And the clan book is being published by PM Press. So
Oh, okay.
Rosarium isn't doing this.
Ah,
So yeah, for my approach to publishing was, I mean, in a lot of ways, yeah, it's very similar. You're kind of looking for something kind of squishy, kind of nebulous. You're kind of looking for like these talents that you wouldn't necessarily see somewhere else, with
mm-hmm,
ideas that you wouldn't necessarily see somewhere else. And that's always what you're kind of looking for. Like you're just kind
mm-hmm,
of looking
mm-hmm.
for like a voice,
Right.
you know. Because I'm a one man band, and I don't have any money, and all I have is like my heart and my time. So the things that I try to do with that is like trying to find the voices that make me want to get up every day and you
Yeah.
know put their stuff out there.
Right.
You know what I mean? And like for me
Yeah.
personally, if you just came out with something that I could see somewhere else,
Mm-hmm,
that this doesn't excite me because like what? Because other people are doing it. Like
mm-hmm.
if you're giving me like as I said, to be squishy, like if you're giving me your essence,
Right. Right.
like that's the thing. Like
Mm-hmm,
I've always been intrigued by the artists that nobody else could be like.
mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
No, no, no. That's
I mean, I
that
always
makes a lot of
said
sense.
like, yeah. So like, I always said like, like Toni Morrison or like a Jimi Hendrix, right? Like, I
Mm-hmm,
could go back in time, right, and give you a guitar at 5 years old and go like, learn to play like Jimi Hendrix, and then fast forward, and you still, 40 years later, wouldn't be able to play like Jimi Hendrix. Like, you just don't like. We got his essence, right?
you
So
know,
like,
it's
that's what I'm looking for.
that's a. I find that to be kind of a weird conundrum because I've been thinking a lot about because like those names you just mentioned, those are all we consider all those to be geniuses, right?
Right.
We consider them to be singularities in a lot of ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's cancel culture has got me to really start to rethink that, and this is why, because
Okay.
the people on that list started to fall off. These would be targets, right? So it's like there were some of my heroes that I thought to be geniuses and um would start to be like, okay, they got like some crazy thing about their history showed up, and we got to debate whether or not, okay, we're going to keep this person in the genius category, or do we keep all this person's music, all this person's literature, or do we have to just get rid of all of it? There was this long debate, and I think the debate came out of the fact that we were so invested in this person as this singular thing, like this would never come again. And so we were so desperate to hold on to this person, this entity, and everything that they created, because we were afraid that we would never get anything like it. And I had to I sort of backed up and came to terms with the idea that, okay, if I lose this person, if this person's, is character is assassinated, let alone, is, taken away from us, then no, we'll get another opportunity to experience genius again. Someone will take his place. It might not be the same thing, but we will experience this thing again. It was just weird. Like, I'll be totally honest. It was when I started thinking about, not so much say R. Kelly, but when I started thinking about like Bill Cosby, I'm not gonna lie. I was seriously thinking. I was like, dang, it's like I lost Bill Cosby. If I'm gonna ever get another Bill Cosby again, it's like, oh no, it's like Bill Cosby show and all this stuff, and then it's like, you know what? I can let it go because no, there'll be somebody else, and I then go about finding that other person. That's like you were saying, like the people that you work with, you're looking for that new generation of geniuses and people, because it's like, no, these people are not going to be around forever. And in this day and age, all it takes is one bad tweet, or a video comes out and that person's gone, because it's usually the most eccentric of us and the most misunderstood of us that have these sordid histories. But yeah,
Well, I think that, I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
I think
We
that
definitely need some Mexican food.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
No,
Well, I
I
think
said when we have these deep conversations, we usually have it over food. So like,
yeah, I know.
yeah,
You just need to like preference that. That's like we usually have that when we meet. Yeah,
yeah. We usually have it.
like people are like
I'm
what?
sorry. Right, yeah. We
No,
usually
I would
having these
say
diatribes over food.
yeah, yeah. They missed that first part because we weren't on the air when we were talking about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, to me, okay. So first, Cosby was easy for me because like I thought he was corny once I got to college. So like by the end of the Cosby Show,
Mhm.
I was like not watching him, and I just like couldn't. And then he came out with that pull your pants up stuff, so I got tired of him. So it was pretty easy for me for that. But I don't know. Like I think like the cancel culture thing is kind of like overblown. And they're one of the problems is, of course, is that we it's just like the whole hero worship thing, just in general, right? Like if we
Mhm.
like somebody because they're good at a thing, we try to make them like these really fantastic human beings, and that's just not necessarily true.
Right.
And that they have, it's just like think about, like I remember back before they finally came clean with, Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, and I remember this one
Mhm.
historian was just like, no, he couldn't have, like it was personal, like TJ was her dad, like it was like
Yeah.
crazy, but I'm like, yeah, like if you're like that invested in like these other human beings that they were great at something, that means that they were just like great human beings, and that's not necessarily true. And then just sort of like people with power are just given a lot of leeway,
Mhm.
um and a lot of them are just going to end up being abusive even if they don't even realize it, because we just defer to power, and I think that's
Yeah.
just like, so in a way what I hope ultimately happens is that maybe power dynamics just change. Maybe just because you're in charge doesn't mean that you get to be in charge of like that person. you
Mhm.
know, like
Right.
it doesn't mean you have license to do all sorts of things. But I mean, I do
Mhm.
agree that whether one throws away a person's works just because of it is just like a case by case and personal basis, right?
Mhm.
Like I used to like, in high school and college and stuff, I was a huge Woody Allen fan, you know. But
Well,
now,
there you
like,
go.
I'm just like, could you just like not be around? Like, I'm like, like I can't,
Now, mind
I
you,
just,
it's like I. There was a time I was a huge. I'm a Robert Crumb. I used to be a Robert Crumb fan. A Crumb
right.
fan. It's like, but it's like the older I get and the more, I guess, as my worldview broadens, it becomes harder to hold on to some of these people.
Yeah,
But
and I think that a lot of that would happen just in one's like own personal evolution anyway. Like I think that
mhm.
there's like, there was a bunch of music that when I was younger I didn't agree with, but I still loved, because we're that hip hop generation. And I'm like, yeah,
That's
you
true.
shouldn't say that, but that's a dope beat. But no,
You,
that's
you,
kind of messed up.
right.
And now I can't listen to it at all, right? Like that's just like I like. And there's stuff that I didn't like that I love now. I mean, I think that that's a part of it, and I think that like, you know, and as far as an artist goes, like I can't deny, like I could probably go through like Annie Hall like word for word, right? I
Mm-hmm.
could probably do Blazing Saddles word for word, like like
Yeah.
there are just things that no matter how I feel about the artists at this point in my life or whatever, like that's just gonna be that's just the influence that they had. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that's fine. And I know that Cosby means a lot to a lot of people. And as an example,
Mm-hmm.
I just don't like people defending him necessarily. I don't think that I think that you can probably draw the line on those sorts of things, but that's a different conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
But to get to where you're going, or what you're asking is like, yeah, I mean, I think that especially in the beginning as a small publisher, like yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that was my goal. Not to necessarily find greatness, because
Okay.
that's like so that's a time thing.
Mm, yes.
Time dictates greatness.
Okay.
That's why. And so what you're looking for, what I'm looking for, is sort of like unique voices, like
Yes.
somebody who just has to say that thing, because like to me that is probably what stands the test of time.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way of knowing because we're not going to be
Mm-hmm.
around. But like to me, the things that seem to stand the test of time are these people who had something to say and did it in such a strong and forceful way that even 20, 50, 100, 200 years go by and we're still reading them.
Man, you
So
know,
that's sort of like this sort of like what you're looking for.
yes.
And that's what I strive to be, like as a my own as a creative myself.
It's crazy. This probably interview should have been like we should have did 2 hours because we I
So
know we could have did and we blew through. We smoked an hour, and it barely feels like 15 minutes. I wanna I wanna end on this question because um I admire you as a publisher because not just because of your eye
thank
for
you.
finding talent, because you like the talent you have come across and published, whether in the anthology, um, all those creators. I still not only did I first connected to them through their work, through what you publish, but I was able to connect with these people personally, and it's almost you could tell that you were not just a good judge of character talent, but a good judge of character, and um,
Oh,
and
thank
I
you.
find that very fascinating, and I think that um, that's a talent that you bring to publishing, the idea of publishing, because that I deal with, and people may not know this. It's like Rosarium Publishing. You know, a lot of the books that I carried on my website, Peep Game Comics, in the very early years, they came from Rosarium Publishing. Um, and like he has always, Bill has always been a huge supporter of everything that I do, and I just want to, definitely pay it forward. Um, but this question that I had
My
was
my
like,
my pleasure, man. I
no,
need a
man, it's
new
been great.
T-shirt. I need a new
Yeah,
T-shirt.
yeah. I need to get back on the road, all that stuff, man.
We all
Um,
do.
yeah, man. It's probably gonna be next year. The thing is though, it's like so I see a lot of indies out here, right?
Mhm.
That call themselves publishers that are doing quote unquote publishing. Um, for them, especially like beginners or people who are just now getting their feet into this, how would you define publishing? Because I don't think publishing. I think people get the misconception that it's publishing is just printing and selling, and I don't think. I think that's like maybe one of the smallest things that publishing is about. But I mean, it's a huge deal, but I don't think it really defines what publishing is. Publishing, not just making a comic, drawing a comic, publishing.
That's a good question. Um, huh. Yeah, that's a tough one. Um,
And you got 8 minutes. Sorry. You're on the
um,
clock.
Okay, all right. Dun, 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 dun.
Right.
I would say this off the top of my head because I've actually never contemplated this. So thank you, sir. Um, I would say, I mean, I think it's sort of like most other things, like everything to its own pretensions, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I guess like, and I just expect to be treated accordingly, I guess you could say. Um, so publishing can be that, right? I mean, I had a zine back in the day, and that was publishing. I mean, it just kind of depends on what your aspirations are and what you're trying to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, if I'm, you know, a hobbyist, say, and like I'm publishing my zine or my single issue or whatever, and I'm going to local cons and stuff, and that's what I want to do. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I that's perfectly legit, and that's publishing, right? But if
Mm-hmm.
you're talking about like I'm publishing and I want to be in a larger arena,
Mm-hmm.
right, and I want to be taken in respected by certain different tiers because there are hierarchies to this, just like there are
Mm-hmm.
hierarchies to everything. And I'm an anarchist, and I hate I hate hierarchies.
Yeah. There you go.
Like, I want to
True.
smash them all, but they exist. So then there's a lot more involved in that. And there are a lot more things that you have to do, and your approach should be different. But also, there are so many different ways to be a publisher now,
Hmm.
um, that I would, even before, I would have a tough time coming up with a definition because I'm kind of against those anyway. But
Hmm.
I mean, look at I think you're the one that posted the question about who was the biggest Black indie publishers now, right?
Yeah,
And
that
you look
was.
at like what Ngozi did, and you look at what Spike did, right?
Yep.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, uh, um, I don't know, much lower level because I never made anywhere near what they've made. Like Rosarium doesn't exist in the traditional sense because we started with Kickstarter. We started,
Mm-hmm.
well, Indiegogo, but that's how we
Mm-hmm.
started, and yeah,
Now,
and
mind
we
you,
are.
at the same time, you're one of the few publishers that I know, indie publishers that I can find your books in libraries. I can find your
Yeah,
books, in academia. So that's
yeah,
definitely a
yeah, all around the
benchmark.
world. Well, I mean, that was one of the things was when Mothership first came out, we were doing the whole lightning source print on demand thing, and the thing that was
Mm-hmm.
bugging me was um because the TOC at the time was fairly impressive to a lot of people. I mean, it's a lot more impressive now because so many of those youngins have become famous now. So like
Hmm.
Mothership, well, you saw what NPR said about it last week, right?
No,
Um,
I missed that.
NPR basically was just like there's a revolution going on in science fiction right now, and it
Mm-hmm.
might have started with Mothership. Yeah.
Well, see, this is why this interview is going to go into a part two. I'm probably going to
Yeah. So
we're gonna
anyway, sorry.
we're
So
gonna catch up because we're gonna do this again because the Afrofuturism conversation, we need to have that because as
okay,
popular
we
and
can have all kinds of conversations, brother. I mean,
as
we
huge
good.
as it is now and has big of a term, it's like not to say that you all coined the phrase,
No, we did
but
not.
you would,
No.
but definitely, it's like
We tapped in.
just like
We tapped in
you
just before
you
it
tapped into
became
the
bigger.
right. It was very early. Like I've been finding some books. Like for instance, I mean to share this. Like I forgot a copy of Bayou,
Oh yeah, yeah,
and
yeah. I was the one to read that. Yeah,
this book, and there's some books out there that was like I felt like it was 10 years ahead of its time. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Um, Without this book, there's no Bitter Roots, right?
Right.
And
Yes.
without your anthologies, there was a and even John can attest to. It's like the momentum that at least for me, that started in Rosarium. I can definitely see the fruits of that now, not just in
Mhm.
comics and literature. I'm seeing it in without without that anthology, probably there wouldn't be um, Children of Blood and I'm butchering the name,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
there
I know
wouldn't
what
be
you're
that.
talking about.
There wouldn't be those books. There wouldn't be those series. It's like,
Oh,
there's
we
a
only got a
ton.
minute, dude.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
thank you.
But no, we're gonna have this
But
conversation again. I'm
yeah,
gonna catch
I
up
mean, we
with
can
you. We're
have
gonna have
that.
this
But
conversation
anyway,
again.
yeah, because like basically, I got angry that we couldn't be in libraries. So then that's
Mm,
how I decided to go with mainstream distribution, which had a lot of its own issues because I was alone.
okay, and with that, you can find all of his books are available on his website, rosariumpublishing.com. They can
Thank you.
follow you at Bill Campbell or what's your social
Use
media links?
Rosarium Bill, or Rosarium Pub on Twitter. RosariumPublishing.com.
Yes.
Those are good. Yeah.
Put in the word Rosarium and he will appear like Candyman. Right.
Yeah,
Um
yeah.
uh,
I'm a nightmare.
right. Man, all
All right,
right. So
brother.
check it out. Yeah, for Bill Campbell, my friend Bill Campbell, for Kyle, take care, buddy. For my
Thanks,
producer
Kyle.
Kyle, for Jen, Miss Jen, who's about to come up with the minute to skim it on the next show. This is Imani Latif, Peep Game Comics. Thanks for tuning in and follow us on all social media platforms at Black Comics Universe. Thanks.
Thank you.